Welcome to today's deep dive. I gotta say, personally, I'm way more familiar with like the Greek philosophers,
Hmm.
Socrates and all them, but getting ready for this, I'm kind of blown away by this ancient Chinese stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We're going way back in time to ancient China to explore this philosopher, Lao Tzu,
Hmm.
and his ideas. Still so relevant even thousands of years later. We've got this awesome lecture about him, and we'll look at his life, his book, and this whole concept of Wu-Wei.
Okay.
Wu-Wei means non-action. And get this, our source actually presents his whole philosophy as like a survival guide for crazy times.
Sure.
Like how to deal with a world that feels totally out of
So
control.
it's pretty familiar, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting right off the bat is that Lao Tzu is like this legendary figure
Hmm.
shrouded in mystery. Even his name, Lao Tzu,
Yeah.
it means old master.
Mm.
It already kind of hints at that mystery.
Ah, I see.
Some stories even say he was born with white hair, like already an old man.
Whoa, really?
Imagine that.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this mysterious old master. Our source says he was a keeper of archives for the Zhou dynasty, like an ancient librarian with tons of knowledge. But
But then it gets really interesting.
what happened?
So picture this, right? The Zhou dynasty is falling apart.
Oh, no.
Chaos everywhere. And Lao Tzu just decides, nope, I'm out of here. Gets on a blue ox,
Gun walks.
yeah, and heads west, wants to live in seclusion.
Okay, now that's an image. So he rides off into the sunset on a blue ox, but he didn't disappear completely, did he?
Thankfully, no. At least not for us. This is where Yin Shi comes in.
Yanji.
He was the gatekeeper at Hungu Pass. Basically, Lao Tzu's trying to leave, and Yin Shi's like, hold up, old man. Before you disappear into the mountains, how about sharing some wisdom?
Uh-huh. I love it. So it's thanks to this gatekeeper that we even have Lao Tzu's teachings.
Pretty much.
Mm.
Our source claims that the Tao Te Ching is Lao Tzu's only confirmed work.
Okay. So the Tao Te Ching, it's kind of a big deal then, but what is it exactly?
Well, it's divided into 81 short chapters, almost like little poems,
Yeah.
and they're open to interpretation.
Ah.
The thing is, the text itself jumps around, not in a straight line. Some
Yeah.
people think it wasn't even meant to be read in order, from start to finish.
Really? Wow. So it's more about like personal reflection,
Yeah.
your own understanding.
Yeah, exactly. It's not laying down the law, more like sparking your intuition.
Okay, that's super interesting. But this Tao Te Ching isn't just, abstract ideas. It introduces some powerful concepts, like Wu-Wei, the art of non-action.
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
So what is Wu-Wei, really? It's not about just sitting around doing nothing, right?
No, definitely not. It's not about being lazy or passive. It's more about aligning yourself with the Tao. That's the fundamental principle, the force behind everything in the universe.
The Tao. That's a pretty big concept to wrap your head around.
For sure. I mean, it's not like a god or a rule book. Think of it more like the energy or flow of the universe itself.
Okay.
Lao Tzu is basically saying, tap into that, and you tap into true power.
Interesting.
He uses the analogy of water to explain this.
Order. Okay, I'm listening.
So water, right? It's soft, it yields, but it can wear down even the hardest rock over time. It finds its way around obstacles, adapts to its surroundings, and in the end, it shapes the whole landscape.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. Lao Tzu is saying real strength isn't about brute force. It's about adapting, going with the flow, finding that path of least resistance.
Exactly. You got it. And when you embrace that flexibility and go with the flow, you can actually navigate challenges better, achieve your goals without forcing things.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about pushing against the current, but more like riding the wave.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And Lao Tzu believed this was the key to real lasting influence. And this idea has huge implications, especially for, leadership.
Okay, how so?
He said the best leaders, they don't try to control everything. They work behind the scenes, empowering others rather than dominating them. It's like they influence things like water, guiding and shaping things subtly without needing that overt control.
So lead by example, inspire others, trust in their abilities, and don't try to force your own way. Right?
Exactly, you're getting it. And Lao Tzu takes this idea even further, actually.
Oh, how?
He argued that true strength comes from embracing weakness and humility.
Whoa. Okay, that's a little mind-bending.
Right, it's one of those paradoxical but incredibly insightful parts of his philosophy. You know that quote from chapter 76?
Which one?
What is strong and hard is associated with death. What is soft and yielding is associated with life. He uses the example of trees. Think about it. The strongest, straightest trees, those are the ones that get chopped down first.
Ah, because they're good lumber.
Right. But the flexible ones, the ones that bend with the wind, those are the ones that survive.
Wow, that image of the trees really makes you think. It completely changes how we see strength, you know?
Definitely. It challenges those traditional ideas about success and power. And this brings us to a really fascinating comparison that our source makes. They look at Lao Tzu's philosophy next to Confucius, another major figure in Chinese thought. Now, Confucius was all about social order, hierarchy, striving for excellence,
Okay.
actively shaping society and people through education and morals.
Right.
But Lao Tzu, he advocates for a more passive, yielding approach, trusting in the natural order, finding strength and weakness.
So two very different ways of looking at life, huh?
Totally. Almost like two different operating systems,
Yeah.
each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Confucius is saying, let's build a better system. Lao Tzu is saying, let's build a better self.
That's such a great way to put it. Which one resonates more with you? I mean, maybe there's wisdom in both, depending on the situation. It really makes you think, you know?
It really does. It makes you think, which one feels more right to me? Which one kind of matches how I see the world, how I want to live my life?
It's a good question. I think I'm drawn to both, to be honest. But before we get too far, our source makes a really interesting point about, like, the context for all of this. Lao Tzu lived when things were pretty rough. Constant warfare, upheaval, all that.
Right, exactly. It was a chaotic time.
So his philosophy, it was almost a survival strategy, like how to get through really tough times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By staying kind of under the radar, avoiding fights, just adapting to all the change, you're way more likely to not just survive, but actually thrive. It's like he's saying, look, the world's a mess, okay? Trying to force your way through it, that's just going to cause more suffering. Go with the flow, adapt, and don't waste your energy.
It kind of goes against what we usually think, but it's really smart when you think about it. But how does go with the flow idea actually work in real life? Like, how did Lao Tzu think about leadership, governing? Our source goes into that a bit, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. This is where his ideas get really interesting. His views on leadership. They're radical, but also kind of familiar. He flips the script on how we usually think about power. He says, true leadership. It's about not appearing to lead.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Our source mentioned something about invisible leadership. What's that all about?
So it's about leading from behind, guiding without trying to control everything, influencing, but not commanding.
Okay.
Lao Tzu thought the best leaders, they create the conditions for things to just happen naturally. They're not forcing their will on everyone else.
So less about giving orders and more about setting a vision, getting people working together, then stepping back and letting them do their thing.
Exactly. He actually uses a really interesting analogy in the Tao Te Ching. He compares the ideal leader to a valley.
A valley. Okay.
Think about it. A valley is open, receptive. It gathers things, nurtures things, it lets things flow towards it naturally, not pushing, not forcing.
That's a really cool image. It's the opposite of that king of the mountain idea, right? Where it's all about being in charge, controlling everything. Lao Tzu saying real strength comes from creating a space for others to grow and succeed.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that is realizing everyone has their own talents,
Yeah.
their own unique things to offer. Our source really emphasizes this, saying a wise leader helps people use those strengths for the good of everyone.
It's like that rising tide lifts all boats idea, right? But our source also said Lao Tzu was big on minimizing desire, striving for contentment. How does that fit with empowering people to achieve their potential? It seems kind of contradictory, you know?
It's a good question. It gets right to the heart of how Lao Tzu thinks. He wasn't saying people shouldn't have ambition or goals. It's more about recognizing that wanting too much, especially power and control, can be a bad thing.
Like that saying, the more you grasp, the less you hold.
Exactly. Yeah. Lao Tzu believed that real fulfillment, real happiness, comes from aligning yourself with the Tao, with that natural flow of the universe. It means accepting things as they are, letting go of trying to control everything, and just finding joy in the moment.
So it's not about squashing ambition, but more about directing it in a way that works with the natural order, with the greater good.
Exactly. And for leadership, this means focusing on service, not on getting ahead yourself. Lao Tzu thought a leader's main job is to take care of the people, not to get glory or power for themselves.
That's a really different perspective, especially these days when leadership seems to be all about ego and looking out for number one. But didn't our source also mention something about Lao Tzu's ideal being like a small country, few people? Was he saying society should like shrink, limit progress and stuff? That seems a little extreme even for a philosopher.
It does seem that way at first glance, but it really shows how much he didn't trust centralized power, how important self-sufficiency was to him. He imagined people living in small, independent communities, taking care of things locally, without interference from some big bureaucratic government.
So less about reversing progress, more about spreading out power, making things sustainable, letting communities look after themselves.
Yeah, you got it. He saw big empires and centralized governments as, like, breeding grounds for corruption and abuse.
Hmm.
The more complex the system, the harder it is to manage, and the more likely things are to go wrong.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
But in our source, they contrast Lao Tzu's ideas with Confucius, who seem to be all about building up a strong central state. It's like they have completely opposite views on how society should work.
It's a fascinating comparison, for sure. It shows how much diversity of thought there was, even back then.
Hmm.
Confucius, he believed in a very structured social order. Everyone knew their place, did their duty.
Yeah.
Education, moral character, being involved in government, that was huge for him.
So striving for the best, both personally and as a society, and using that to make a strong, successful nation.
Yes, exactly. And while Confucius's ideas have definitely shaped Chinese culture and government over the centuries, our source says Lao Tzu's philosophy offers a really valuable alternative, especially today.
House.
Well, think about the big problems we face now. Climate change, political divisions, inequality, technology changing so fast.
Yeah.
These are huge, complex issues. They can't be solved by just doing more of the same, by clinging to old ideas of control.
So we need a new approach, one that's more adaptable, more about cooperation, about understanding how everything's connected.
You got it. And that's where Lao Tzu's wisdom comes in. He encourages us to question our ideas about power, to become more aware of nature and our place in it, to work together instead of always trying to be in charge, and to put well-being and sustainability ahead of just wanting more and more.
It's like he's giving us a guide for navigating a world that just keeps getting more complicated and unpredictable.
And even though his philosophy came out of ancient China, his message about balance, adapting, and finding strength in what seems weak, it feels more important than ever.
My mind is officially blown. Lao Tzu's ideas are so simple, but so deep. But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, our source also talks about how his philosophy compares to The Art of War by Sun Tzu. What can we learn from that connection?
Oh yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Get ready for some surprises. The connections between these two guys, Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu, they're way deeper than you think.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the wisdom of Lao Tzu. So far, we've looked at his life, his philosophy of Wu-Wei, his unique ideas about leadership. But now, we're going to bring in a kind of surprising source, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I mean, on the surface, these two books are totally different. But our source says there are some really fascinating parallels. What's the connection?
Well, the amazing thing is that both Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu, even though one's a philosopher and the other's a military strategist, they both emphasize this idea of yielding, knowing when to step back, and ultimately achieving victory through non-action.
Wait a minute. Sun Tzu, the master of war strategy, he's advocating for non-action. That sounds like a recipe for getting crushed.
Hold on. Remember, Wu-Wei doesn't mean just sitting there doing nothing. It's about working with the natural flow of things. Choosing your battles, not using force unless you have to.
Okay.
In the context of war, this means knowing when to attack and when to retreat, when to strike and when to wait for the perfect opportunity. It's about using your enemy's strengths against them, not through direct confrontation, more like a strategic kind of jujitsu.
So it's about being smart, calculated, picking your battles. It's not about pacifism. It's about getting the biggest impact with the least effort.
Exactly. Sun Tzu famously said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." And Lao Tzu, he'd probably agree. They both thought true strength comes from understanding the natural order, adapting to the situation, and using those forces to reach your goals.
So in a way, they're both talking about mastering yourself, your impulses, your reactions.
Absolutely. They both emphasize self-knowledge, discipline, being able to stay calm and think strategically, even when everything's crazy and uncertain.
I love how this deep dive is connecting all these seemingly different ideas and showing how they're actually related. It's like weaving together threads of wisdom from all different times and perspectives.
And what's even more fascinating is how these ancient teachings can help us with the challenges we face today. I mean, our world is so interconnected now, so complex, so volatile. The old ways of doing things, the old ideas about leadership, they just don't cut it anymore.
Yeah, because they're all about control and dominance, right?
Exactly. In a world that's constantly changing, where everything's connected, we need something different, something more fluid, more adaptable, something that can handle uncertainty, that uses collaboration, that puts long-term sustainability ahead of short-term gains.
So, what does all this mean for us, regular people trying to navigate this crazy world? What can we actually take away from Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu and use in our own lives?
The main message here is this: real strength. It's not about force or domination. It's about understanding the natural flow of things and working with it. And this applies to everything: our relationships, our jobs, our personal growth, even how we deal with global problems.
So, instead of trying to force our will on the world, we should try to understand its rhythms, its patterns, adapt to change, and work with the forces around us, not against them.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance point between action and non-action, effort and ease, striving and acceptance.
Kind of like that image of water that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's soft and yielding, but over time it can carve out canyons, it finds its way, adapts to obstacles, and ultimately it reshapes the whole landscape.
Exactly. And that's what I want you to think about. If water, something that seems so weak, can shape the world through gentle persistence, what could you achieve by taking a similar approach? What mountains could you move? What challenges could you overcome by harnessing the power of Wu-Wei?
That's a powerful image to end on. And with that, we're wrapping up our deep dive into the wisdom of Lao Tzu and the surprising connections to Sun Tzu's Art of War. We hope you've gained some new insights, maybe challenged some old assumptions, and perhaps even found some inspiration to see the world and your place in it in a whole new light. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep questioning, and keep exploring the hidden connections that bind us all together.